Hello. So this is going to attempt to be a introductory tutorial on Blender, but it's a little bit informal. But yeah, we hope to get an image, something like this. We're making a I don't know. Does anyone make a real birthday cake like this? I don't think so. But a three-tiered birthday cake. All right, and so I'm going to hit File, New, Reload Startup File. So this is the first screen that you would see. Um, Now, I first want to talk about some of the weird things with Blender. I'm not going to go over all the controls or anything like that because there are a ton of controls, um, and there might be some other videos you could check out. But I am going to talk about some of the oddities, and then I'll tell you what controls I'm using to do things. So the first oddity is that right click is how you select objects. You can change that in the user preferences. So you could go to File up here. You might be missing File if you don't have an info window. We'll talk about windows in a second. The File, User Preferences, Input. You can select with left if you want, but I like the right. Some other useful things. If you don't have a 3-button mouse, you probably want to emulate a 3-button mouse. I think that makes it so if you click left and right at the same time, you get a it does the same thing as clicking middle mouse. And then if you don't have a numpad, if you're using a laptop or whatever, it'll allow you to pretend you have a numpad, which is nice. Alright, so those were in user preferences. So we're back on this main screen. I was talking about how right click selects objects. Left click just moves this 3D cursor around. I honestly don't move this 3D cursor around very much. I usually just want it to be at the origin, which I can make happen if I hit spacebar to bring up this menu, and I can just say snap cursor to center, or if I typed like cursor, it still would have come up. But yeah, snap cursor to center, and if you hit like Shift C, it does something similar. All right, that's not so important. So you select things. The middle mouse button will rotate around a point. Right now it's rotating around that middle, that origin. But let's say and then I can move that point of rotation by hitting Shift and middle mouse button. So now it's rotating around this corner. And something that people will do sometimes is like zoom in really far in this corner and then look over that cube and be like, oh, I want to get over that cube. Let me zoom toward that cube and use the middle mouse button. And it only moves this far because I'm zoomed in all the way on my point of rotation, which is over here by this corner. I just zoomed out. I'm going to zoom back out. And so it zoomed in on that corner, and so I couldn't make it over to the cube by zooming. So I kind of have to move that point of rotation. And so I think that's something that gets a lot of people kind of stuck when they're moving around. The numpad is really helpful. Right now I'm in perspective mode, so things kind of get like distorted when you get up close to them. And the amount of distortion depends on the focal length of your camera, or the focal length of the viewport. I wonder how it decides on that. I know I've changed it before. Anyway, but orthographic is also useful. So you hit 5 on your numpad to go into orthographic view, which kind of, if I then hit 1 on the numpad, I'll go into this front view. So that's how I can get like a nice 2D sort of view. Or if I'm in orthographic view and I hit 3, it's from the right, or 7, it's from the top. And so if I have my point of rotation kind of over here and I hit 1, I can bring it back over toward the cube, and then hit 3, bring it back over toward the cube, and now my point of rotation will be right on that cube. That's a useful little trick. I'll go back to perspective mode by hitting 5 on the numpad. Alright. These windows are a little bit weird. You can resize them, and you might think like this is a window, but no, this is just like a little tab inside this 3D window. So if I change this to a different type of window, Some of them have little tabs on the side, and like there's this other tab on this window. The windows have these little hashes at the bottom left and top right, and each window will have the ability either in the bottom left or in the top left to change the type of window. And so I think that's kind of confusing that it sometimes switches to top left, but it's nice once you get used to it. And you can kind of get a sense of where these windows are with these little hash marks. And so yeah, you can always change any type of window. There's some standard layouts. Right now we're in default. I like this video editing layout for editing video. It's a nice non-linear video editor. It's my favorite open source video editor as well. Blender has a ton of stuff in it. So I'll go back to default. You can add new windows by clicking here is one way of doing it. And then you can kind of right click here and say join area. You can drag down as well. Right click, join areas. Doesn't really matter. Alright, so those windows are a little bit weird. You'll get used to them. The right click is a little bit weird. That point of rotation is a little bit weird, how you can kind of get stuck on it. Other than that, things are pretty good. I can't think of anything else I want to talk about. Alright, so let's click on this cube. Let's delete it because our cake doesn't have any cubes in it. So the first thing we want to do is add a cylinder. So I could say object, nope, add mesh cylinder. It'll also, actually it doesn't tell me the shortcut for add, huh? If you go here and you hit Shift A, it adds mesh cylinder. Yeah. And I want to change the size of that. I'm cool with like the 32 vertices. Let's make this like 4 wide. That looks good. Okay, and this is just me being weird. No, I won't even do it. Okay, so we've got one cylinder there. So now let's duplicate. So I hit Shift D to duplicate. Let's undo that. So I can click on it with right click. I could go to object and duplicate. Shift D, it tells you. So I'm gonna hit Shift D to duplicate it. And then, so now it's grabbed. Oh, I didn't talk about this yet, but once it's grabbed, you can hit Z to make it so it just moves along the Z axis, or X, or Y to move just along the Y axis, or I can hit Shift Z to make it so it just moves. It moves anywhere besides in the Z, so it moves just in the X and Y, or like Shift X to make it so it only moves in the Y and Z directions. I'm gonna hit Z because I wanted to go straight up, and it was too tall, so I can just hit 1, nope, 2, oh, not 12, 2, hit enter, and it'll be stacked right up on there. Although that's not what we quite want because we want it to be smaller. So I'm gonna scale this by 0.7, just to be weird. And so now I could hit 5 for orthographic and 1, and you see it's not sitting on top of that. So one way to change that is to use this magnet, snap during transform. And I want it to snap to faces. I want faces to snap onto each other. So now if I hit G for grab, and then I hit Z to make it so it only moves in the Z direction, while my mouse is on this face, it'll snap to that face. And so then let's repeat that whole process. So Shift D, it's already grabbed when you hit Shift D, and then press Z. It doesn't really matter right now. S for scale, I might have skipped that last time. S for scale or resize. So if I type this, I could hit like resize, but it tells us scale or S. So S and then 0.7. And then again, I'm going to grab Z, plop that down. We're starting to get a cake. Good. So now we just need candles. I feel like I'm skipping some things, but we just need some candles. So I'm gonna, I can just duplicate this cylinder. Shift D, grab Z, and let's move it up a little bit. And so now we want to scale this in all directions besides Z. So Shift Z, scale S, and then Shift Z, and then like 0.2. But I want it smaller than that. So scale, Shift Z. Let's scale, Shift Z, 0.2 again. That's looking pretty good. And Shift Z, let's say 0.6. Nope. Scale Z, 0.8. Alright, that's looking about right for a candle. And then the candle, we want a wick on. So actually I want to make the candles their own objects with the wick to be part of the object. And there are two ways of doing that. I could enter edit mode and do this with an edit mode, or I could just, I could press Shift D, Z, let's scale this to 0.1, scale that twice as big, there we go. And then we could hit grab Z, and then what I could do is select both of them. So I select this bottom one with right click, select the top one with right click as well after hitting Shift. So right click and then Shift, right click. While I'm holding Shift, I click the other one so I can select two of them. And then we want to join those two to one mesh. So you could, I think it's like Control J, or I can hit space and type in join, Control J. It tells us. So join them, and so now it has just one. And I'm gonna actually do something that I like to do with objects. I like to, while in edit mode, I like to make this dot right at the bottom of the object, and I forget how to do it precisely, but I'll go to front ortho and press grab Z and get those pretty close. Grab Z or whatever, and since I can change the size of this object, I'll go to wireframe mode. I can do that by pressing Z, just Z by itself. I'll hit A to unselect everything. A also selects all, or if you have multiple things selected, it'll unselect all. Then I'll hit B for box, select those, bring up this little menu, and locally I want to drag these to a height of 0. So that's one way of doing it. So I'll get out of wireframe mode, and I got out of edit mode. And again, that's just a personal preference, and the reason I do that is now if I scale this object, it scales relative to that little dot, and that can be nice, because often you like rest thing, like if it's a couch or whatever and you put it on a floor and then you want to resize the couch, if you have that dot on the bottom and then scale it, the couch will still be sitting on the floor, if that makes any sense. So like if this is, so grab Z, put it on the cake. So if I want to rescale this candle now, it'll scale relative to that dot, and so it'll always be sitting on that cake as I resize it. Seems like a weird thing to put in an introductory video, but that's what's on my mind right now. Alright, so now I want a bunch more candles, and I'm sure there's a better way of doing this, but I'm just going to do it by first duplicating this candle, hitting Y to bring this along the Y-axis, and putting it right about there. That looks cool. And then I'm going to do a little trick. The cursor right now is right at the origin, which is great. That's where I want it, because I can now, instead of having things act around that yellow dot, the pivot point or whatever, we can make it so they act around this 3D cursor. So now if I scale this candle, you see it doesn't stay on the cake because it's scaling relative to that dot. But why that's helpful is if I now duplicate this candle and I rotate with R, we haven't done rotate yet, rotate with R, and then so now it's rotating around there. Now if I hit Z, it'll only be able to rotate around the Z axis from the 3D cursor, which happens to be the origin. So this is the global Z axis. I've realized I probably could do that even without this. If I just put this at the normal and I hit rotate Z, Z. Nope, it doesn't work. Never mind. Ignore that. Rotate Z while you're in the cursor as your pivot point, and then 40 because I want 9 of these. Duplicate, rotate Z, 40, and I could keep doing that, or I can select all 3 of these and then Shift D for duplicate, rotate around the Z axis as defined by the 3D cursor right now because I have that option selected, and then 120, right, because I have the pivot point on the 3D cursor. Duplicate, rotate Z, 120. Cool. And then I'm sure there's a nice way of duplicating all 9 of those and bringing them down, but I'm just going to repeat that process. So I'm going to duplicate this one, which is right along the y-axis, duplicate, and then I'm going to make it so it can only move in the y direction. No, I'll make it so it can not move in the x direction, but y and z. Place it here, and then duplicate, rotate, z-axis 40 degrees, duplicate, rotate, z-axis, I guess negative 40. Oop, not negative 40. Why did I do that? I don't know what I was thinking. 40. Oh, just hit negative again. There we go. Duplicate, rotate, Z, 120. Duplicate, rotate, Z, 120. And then again, duplicate, Shift X, so it doesn't move in the X direction. Place that there. Duplicate, rotate, Z, 40. Duplicate, rotate, Z, 40. And like I said, there are better ways of doing this. Duplicate, rotate, Z, 120. Duplicate, rotate, Z, 120. But sometimes you spend too much time optimizing and not enough time just making things. Alright, so I pressed A to unselect everything, and there we go. We've got something that kind of looks like a cake. And then we want to think about this light. Oh, that light is wonderfully placed. No, I don't know. Let's turn it into a sun. So when you have a given object selected, you'll see some of these icons change. Right now I could change the properties about the camera, because this is the properties area right now, or window. If I click on this light, it'll give me properties about this lamp, and I'll turn it into a sun. Let's also get some environmental lighting, and we'll change that to like 0.5. Alright, so you don't know what that did because I didn't show you what happened before. That sucks. Anyway, so if I hit 0, I go into this view of the camera. You'll notice if I hit F12, that's that same view. Here, if we took off the environmental lighting, there's black parts, right? But this environmental lighting makes it so there's a little bit of light from all directions. But you can still get some black parts if they're like really tucked away from the outside. And then that sun versus a point light, it doesn't really matter. If I change this back to a point, it's as if they're all emanating from a point, rather a point that's close and like not very bright, rather than the sun is like a point that's infinitely far away, more or less, and very bright. so the sun's rays are parallel. It's sort of like the same thing between perspective and orthographic view that we saw before. Alright, so if I click on this camera, so when I'm in the camera, that's how I select the camera. If I hit 0, if I want to select this camera, I can click on this little box here. I'm going to scroll forward to make that box take up more of my window. And what I can do over here, if this isn't open, remember you can bring it up by clicking there, or you can press N as in Nomad. And over here you can lock camera to view. So now if I move my view around, the camera kind of moves with it. Sometimes you don't get to move quite as precisely as you would like, especially with the wheel. I'm sure there's a way of changing that. Anyway, and so now you can hit F12, and there we go. We've got our cake. And that's pretty good. All right. Thank you. Have a good one.